This is the Troll Patrol, live with Justin FREAKIN.
Welcome to the Troll Patrol, live when I tried to come on like fucking 20 minutes ago. Had some internet issues. That was totally my fault. I was trying to upload one of the videos I did for one of my clients. It was sucking all my upload speed. So unfortunately, I couldn't come on before the panel. The January 6th committee came in and sat down. Liz Cheney currently talking. Chairman Benny Thompson just finished up whatever his opening remarks were. Go ahead and get to it. In progress. Oh. Wrong display. I'm still getting everything set up here at the new digs. This is Representative Liz Cheney. They just sat down about 5-10 minutes ago. I'm not high enough for this shit. I'm not even high at all, period. So I'm going to pack a bong. Let's hear what Liz Cheney has to say.
Head with January. And second, consider how millions of Americans were persuaded to believe what Donald Trump's closest advisors in his administration did not. These Americans
so today's hearings are going to focus on the extremism
they put
led to
their
the
faith
attack
and their trust in Donald Trump. They wanted to believe in him. They wanted to fight for their country, and he deceived them. For millions of Americans, that may be painful to accept, but it is true.
It is. Cognitive dissonance is a bitch. I had a lot of right-wingers tell me, like, well, they believe the election was stolen. I don't give a shit what they believe. They're stupid.
From Maryland, Mr. Raskin, for opening statements.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We know beyond a shadow of a doubt that then President Donald Trump lost in a free and fair election.
Damn right.
And yet, President Trump insisted that his loss was due to fraud in the election process, rather than to the...
Because he's a fucking loser.
The president continued to make this claim despite being told again and again by the courts, by the Justice Department, by his campaign officials, and by some of his closest advisors that the evidence did not support this assertion. This was the big lie, and millions of Americans were deceived by it. Too many of our fellow citizens still believe it to this day. It's corrosive to our country and damaging to our democracy. As our committee has shown in prior hearings, following the election, President Trump relentlessly pursued multiple interlocking lines of effort, all with a single goal: to remain in power despite having lost.
To make himself a dictator.
Aimed at his loyal Vice President, Mike Pence, at state election
to install himself as a dictator.
And at the U.S. Department of Justice. The president pressured the vice president to obstruct the process to certify the election result. He demanded that state officials find him enough votes to overturn the election outcome in that state. And he pressed the Department of Justice to find widespread evidence of fraud. When justice officials told the president that such evidence did not exist, the president urged them to simply declare
Make it up.
That the election was corrupt.
Just declare it, and then the state legislatures.
The Electoral College met to officially confirm.
We'll take care of it from there. That's exactly what he said.
President. The evidence shows that once this occurred, President Trump and those who were willing to aid and abet him turned their attention to the joint session of Congress scheduled for January 6th, at which the vice president would preside.
Be there. It's going to be wild, he said.
The ceremonial event was the next, and perhaps the last, inflection point that could be used to reverse the outcome of the election before Mr. Biden's inauguration. As President Trump put it, the vice president and enough members of Congress simply needed to summon the courage to act. To help them find that courage, the president called for backup. Early in the morning of December 19th, the president sent out a tweet urging his followers to travel to Washington, D.C. for January 6th. Be there. We'll be wild, the president.
It'll be wild.
As my colleague, Mr. Raskin, will describe in detail, this tweet served as a call to action, and in some cases, as a call to arms.
Come on,
for
man.
many of President Trump's most loyal supporters.
Come on, man. It'll be wild.
The president intended the assembled crowd on the January 6th to serve his goal. And as you've already seen, and as you will see again today, some of those who were coming had specific plans.
Definitely
the
not
president's
straight.
goal was to stay in power for a second term despite losing the election. The assembled crowd was one of the tools to achieve that goal. And in today's hearing, we will focus on events that took place in the final weeks leading up to January 6th, starting in mid-December. And we'll add color and context to evidence you've already heard about, and we'll also provide additional new evidence. For example, you'll hear about meetings in which the president entertained extreme measures designed to help him stay in power, like the seizure of voting machines. We will show some of the coordination that occurred between the White House and members of Congress as it relates to—
I do want to point out that
And some of
COVID
these
is once
members of
again
Congress
ripping through
later
Capitol
see
Hill.
court.
There are multiple
We
lawmakers
will also examine
who have
some of the
tested
planning
positive for
the January
COVID.
6 protests, placing special
I'm not
emphasis
exactly
on
sure
one
that
rally
holding these
planner's
hearings
concerns
is
about the
like in
potential
person.
violence. And we will
is a
describe
smart
some of the
move.
president's key actions on the evening of January 5th and the morning of January 6th, including
But
how
here
the
we
president
are.
edited and ad-libbed his speech that morning at the Ellipse, directed the crowd to march to the Capitol, and spoke off script in a way that further inflamed an already angry crowd. I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Mr. Chair.
What up, Representative Raskin?
4 days after the electors met across the country and made Joe Biden the president-elect, Donald Trump was still trying to find a way to hang on to the presidency. On Friday, December 18th, his team of outside
And hell, I
advisors
even
paid
said
him
in
a surprise
2015,
visit
the beginning of
in the White
2016,
House
like
that would
if he was to
quickly
become
become
president, he would never
stuff
leave
of
willingly.
legend. The meeting has
I
been
was
called
correct.
unhinged, not normal, in the craziest meeting of the Trump presidency.
Anyone could see that
The
coming
outside
a mile
lawyers who've been
away.
involved in dozens of failed lawsuits had lots of theories supporting the big lie, but no evidence to support it. As we will see, however, they brought to the White House a draft executive order that they had prepared for President Trump to further his ends. Specifically, they proposed the immediate mass seizure of state election machines by the U.S. military. The meeting ended after midnight with apparent rejection of that idea. In the wee hours of December 19th, dissatisfied with his options, Donald Trump decided to call for a large and wild crowd on Wednesday, January 6th, the day when Congress would meet to certify the electoral votes. Never before in American history had a president called for a crowd to come contest the counting of electoral votes by Congress, or engaged in any effort designed to influence, delay, or obstruct the joint session of Congress in doing its work required by our Constitution and the Electoral Count Act. As we'll see, Donald Trump's 1:42 a.m. tweet electrified and galvanized his supporters, especially the dangerous extremists in the Oath Keepers, the Proud Boys, and other racist and white nationalist groups spoiling for a fight against the government. 3 rings of interwoven attack were now operating towards January 6th. On the inside ring, Trump continued trying to work to overturn the election by getting Mike Pence to abandon his oath of office as vice president and assert the unilateral power to reject electoral votes. This would have been a fundamental and unprecedented breach of the Constitution that would promise Trump multiple ways of staying in office. Meanwhile, in the middle ring, members of domestic violent extremist groups created an alliance, both online and in person, to coordinate a massive effort to storm, invade, and occupy the Capitol. By placing a target on the joint session of Congress, Trump had mobilized these groups around a common goal, emboldening them, strengthening their working
Welcome, everyone. If you're just joining
helping
us,
build
this
their
is day
numbers.
7 of the
Finally,
January
in the outer
6th
ring, on January 6th,
hearings
there
on the
assembled a
Capitol
large and angry
attack.
crowd. The political force that Trump
We
considered
just got started about 15 minutes
touchstone
ago.
and the measure of his political power. Here were thousands of enraged Trump followers, thoroughly convinced by the big lie, who traveled from across the country to join Trump's wild rally.
And I'm not high enough for this shit.
With the proper
What is up,
incitement by
Toads?
political leaders and the proper instigation from the extremists, many members of this crowd could be led to storm the Capitol, confront the vice president in Congress, and try to overturn the 2020.
We got 2 of these this week. The next one happening
All of
on
these efforts
Thursday.
would converge
It will be in
and
prime
explode
time.
on January the 6th.
We're
Mr.
doing
Chairman,
January
as you
6th.
know better than any other member of
Warlord.
this committee from the wrenching struggle for voting rights in your beloved Mississippi, the problem of politicians whipping up mob violence to destroy fair elections.
So here's the thing with
oldest
Bannon
domestic enemy.
is apparently the committee is scoffing at Bannon saying that he is wanting to testify, saying you had your chance. Now you're just trying to get out of your criminal trial, and we see through you. That is what the committee has responded to Steve Bannon.
That no transatlantic military giant could ever crush us as a nation.
But you can't say that all of us wouldn't be here watching this if Steve Bannon was going to testify live.
We ourselves would be its author and finisher. If racist mobs are encouraged by politicians to rampage and terrorize, like it said, they will violate the rights of other citizens and quickly destroy the bonds of social trust necessary for democracy to work. Mobs and demagogues will put us on a path to political tyranny, Lincoln said. As we'll see today, this very old problem has returned with new ferocity today as a president who lost an election deployed a mob which included dangerous extremists to attack the constitutional system of election and the peaceful transfer of power. And as we'll see, the creation of the internet and social media has given today's tyrants tools of propaganda and disinformation that yesterday's despots could only have dreamed of. I yield back to the gentle lady from Florida, Ms. Murphy.
And the fact that capitalism lends itself so
Article
well
2 of the
to
United States
fascist
Constitution
endeavors.
establishes the Electoral College. Each state's laws provide that electors are to be chosen by a popular vote. And on December 14th, 2020, electors met in all 50 states and the District of Columbia to cast their votes. Joseph Biden won by a margin of 306 to 232. The election was over. Mr. Biden was the president-elect. Before the Electoral College met, Donald Trump and his allies filed dozens of legal challenges to the election, but they lost over and over again, including in front of multiple judges.
63 was the final count? I don't even know.
In many of these cases, the judges were highly critical of the arguments put forward, explaining that no genuine evidence of widespread fraud had been presented. For example, a federal judge in Pennsylvania said, "This court has been presented with strained legal arguments without merit and speculative accusations unsupported by evidence. In the United States of America, this cannot justify the disenfranchisement of a single voter, let alone all the voters of its sixth most populated state." On December 15th, after the Electoral College certified the outcome, the Republican majority leader in the Senate acknowledged Mr. Biden's victory.
Yesterday, electors met in all 50 states. So as of this morning, our country has officially a president-elect and a vice president-elect. Many millions of us had hoped the presidential election would yield a different result.
You had hoped that the presidential election would result in the man
on January the 20th
that tried to install himself as dictator actually winning.
has spoken.
It still just,
today
it
I want
blows
to
my
congratulate
mind.
President-elect Joe
And
Biden.
even the one dude that testified in the January 6th committee hearing.
Even members of President Trump's cabinet
he was
and
one
his
of the
White House staff
election
understood the
officials in
significance of his
Arizona, I
losses
believe it
in the
was.
courts and the absence of evidence of fraud.
That he would still
They
support
also
Donald
accepted
Trump.
the constitutional certification by the Electoral College. Many of them told
Yes, we're going to have
it was time to concede the election to Mr. Biden.
extremists that were
example,
part of the
then
riot
Secretary of
testify
Labor
today.
James Scalia,
Yes, we
an
are indeed
accomplished
going to have
lawyer
somebody
and the son
good
of the late
on.
Justice Scalia called
Warlord, where were
President
you
Trump
at
in
last
mid-December
night?
and
I
advised him
previewed
to
this. We
concede
talked
and
about
accept the
this.
rules
We
of the
talked about
courts.
what we would hear today.
And so I had to put a call into the president. I might have called on the 13th. We spoke, I believe, on the 14th, in which I conveyed to him that I thought that it was time for him to acknowledge that
It is late where
President
you're
Biden
at
had
when I get to
prevailed in the
it was
election.
midnight
But I
when I got
communicated
off
to the
last
president
night.
that, when that legal process
It's
is
like morning
exhausted,
time in the UK.
and when the electors have voted, that's the point at which that outcome needs to be
Corvo
effective.
B.
I told him that I
Canero.
did believe, yes, that once those legal
Welcome. Thank you for being a freaking follower.
if fraud had not been established that had affected the outcome of the election, then unfortunately I believe that what had to be done was concede the outcome.
As you've seen in prior hearings, President Trump's Justice Department, his White House staff, and his campaign officials were repeatedly telling him that there was no evidence of fraud sufficient to change the outcome of the election.
The SCOTUS has already been doing away with our democracy.
President Trump's White House counsel, Pat Cipollone.
We barely even achieved what could be called
and even more in our next hearing.
a semblance of democracy, and we've had that stripped away from us.
That there was no evidence of fraud sufficient to overturn the election.
I want to start by asking if you agree, Mr. Cipollone, with the conclusions of Matt Morgan, of Bill Barr, of all of the individuals who evaluated those claims, that there is no evidence of election fraud sufficient to undermine the outcome in a particular state.
Yes, I agree with that.
That was Friday. That was Cipollone, and his testimony sat with the committee for about 8 hours on Friday.
Did you believe, and Mr. Cipollone, that the president should concede?
And for those of you that don't know what warlord may be referring to, it's Harbor v. Moore. I believe that's the case that will allow the legislatures to ignore the popular vote and just name whoever the fuck they want to be president.
Well, again,
there's a case that's going to be heard in the next session of the Supreme Court.
Political. So to the extent that, but if your question is, did I believe he should concede the election at a point in time? Yes, I did. I believe
he should have conceded when he lost.
Went onto the floor of the Senate, I believe, in mid-December, and basically said, the process is done. That would be in line with my thinking on these things.
As Attorney General Bill Barr testified, December 14th should have been the end of the matter.
Yep.
December 14th was the day that the states certified their votes and sent them to Congress. And in my view, that was the end of the matter. I didn't see, I thought that this would lead inexorably to a new administration.
Mr. Cipollone also testified that the president's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, said he shared this view.
As early as that November 23rd meeting, we understand that there was discussion about the president possibly conceding.
I mean, warlord's right.
Specifically,
the Brits got a point over here.
Mark Meadows assured both you and Attorney General Barr that the president would eventually agree to a graceful exit. Do you remember, Mr. Meadows?
The independent state legislature theory.
Are you saying as part of that meeting or separately? Again, without
legal theory that the rod has been thrown.
That is a statement and a sentiment that I heard from Mark Meadows.
I see. And again, do you know if it was on November 23rd or some point?
Again, it was probably, around that time, and it was probably subsequent to that time. It wasn't a one-time statement.
Mr. Meadows has refused to testify, and the committee is in litigation with him. But many other White House officials shared the view that once the litigation ended and the Electoral College met, the election was over. And here's President Trump's former press secretary.
I wanted to clarify, Ms. McEnany, so back to my previous
fucking Kayleigh McEnany.
Was your view then, or was it your view that the efforts to overturn the election should have stopped once the litigation was complete?
In my view, upon the conclusion of litigation was when I began to plan for life after the administration.
When she started lobbying for her Fox News job is what she means.
And this is what Ivanka Trump told us.
Why is she dressed like Big Bird?
December 14th was the day.
Why is she looking like Sweet D?
When these electors around the country met and cast the electoral votes consistent.
Who am I to talk? I'm wearing a yellow shirt.
And it was obviously a public proceeding or a series of proceedings that President Biden had obtained the requisite number of electors. Was that an important day for you? Did that affect sort of your planning or your realization as to whether or not there was going to be an end of this administration?
I think so. I think it was my sentiment probably prior as well.
Well, yeah. God, it was my sentiment. What was it, November 10th, 11th? When was it called?
This was his testimony about what he told President Trump.
That Friday when Biden gave the speech in the parking lot, like I thought he was president then. Like, Not that he had assumed the role of president, but that he had won the presidency
to elect a president and vice president. And I believed at that point that the means for him to pursue litigation was probably closed.
And you recall what his response, if any, was?
He disagreed.
Because he's a man baby.
We've also seen this testimony from Attorney General Barr reflecting a view of the White House staff in late November 2020.
And then at that point, I left. And as I walked out of the Oval Office, Jared was there with Dan Scavino, who ran the president's social media, and who I thought was a reasonable guy and believe is a reasonable guy. And I said, how long is he going to carry on with this stolen election stuff? Where's this going to go? And by that time, Meadows had caught up with me and leaving the office and caught up with me and said that he said, look, I think that he's becoming more realistic and knows that there's a limit to how far he can take this. And then Jared said, yeah, we're working on this. We're working on it.
Likewise, in this testimony, Cassidy Hutchinson...
We're working on getting reality to the fucking president. That's a scary statement.
John Ratcliffe, a former Republican congressman.
He had expressed to me that he was concerned that it could spiral out of control and potentially be dangerous, either for our democracy or the way that things were going through the 6th.
Of course, underlying all of this is the fundamental principle that the President of the United States cannot simply disregard the rulings of state and federal courts, which are empowered to address specific election-related claims. The President cannot simply pretend that the courts had not ruled.
By that time, the president or his associates had lost 60 out of 61 cases that they had brought to challenge different aspects of the election in a number of states. They lost 60 out of 61 of those cases. So by the time we get to January 3rd, that's been clear.
61 out of 63.
Would agree the president is...
I pulled the number out of my ass earlier and said 63.
Obligated to abide by the rulings of the courts.
Of course.
And I assume you also...
Everybody is obligated to abide by rulings of the courts.
And I assume you also would agree the president has a particular obligation to take care that the laws be faithfully executed.
That is one of the...
I believe he pledges to do that. Or swears an oath to do that.
These court rulings and the counsel from his closest advisors and continued his efforts to cling to power. In our prior hearings, you have heard considerable testimony about President Trump's attempts to corruptly pressure Vice President Pence to refuse to count electoral votes, to corrupt the Department of Justice, to pressure state officials and state legislatures, and to create and submit a series of fake electoral slates. Now, we will show you what other actions President Trump was taking between December 14th, 2020 and January 6th. I yield to the gentleman from Maryland, Mr. Raskin.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy. Throughout our hearings, you've heard how President Trump made baseless claims that voting machines were being manipulated by foreign powers in the 2020 election.
Amnestic!
You've also heard Trump's Attorney General, Bill Barr, describe such claims as complete nonsense, which
fuckers indeed.
Let's review that testimony.
We're talking about Congress.
I saw absolutely zero basis for the allegations, but they were made in such a sensational way.
Don't mind if I do, RB.
A lot of people, members of the public, that there was this systemic corruption in the system and that their votes didn't count and that these machines controlled by somebody else were actually determining it, which was complete nonsense. And it was being laid out there. And I told them that it was crazy stuff and they were wasting their time on that. And it was doing a grave disservice to the country.
We've learned that...
That's amazing to me that Bill Barr was actually acting in the best interest of the country and the people of the United States. That's what he's supposed to do.
Made a public announcement.
He is the attorney for the United States as Attorney General, or was the attorney for the United States as Attorney General, and that was his job. It's amazing to me that he actually did it.
It's fair to say that I agree with Attorney General Barr's conclusion on December 1st. Yes, I did, and I supported that conclusion.
However, the strong rejection of the Attorney General in the White House...
Raskin was looking like a sneaky kid that like stole a cookie.
But that's not all he did.
He came back from that
clip. The president asked Attorney General Bill Barr to have the Department of Justice seize voting machines in the states.
My recollection is the president said something like, well, we could get to the bottom. You know, some people say we could get to the bottom of this if the department seized the machines. It was a typical way of raising a point. And I said, absolutely not. There's no probable cause, and I'm not going to seize any machines.
Yep.
And that was that.
Yeah. But this wasn't the end of the matter. On the evening of December 18th, 2020, Sidney Powell, General Michael Flynn, and others entered the White House.
What a group of chuckle fucks.
President. The meeting that would last multiple hours and become hot-blooded and contentious.
You think we're stupid? You think we're fools?
The executive order behind me on the screen was drafted on December the 16th, just 2 days after the Electoral College vote, by several of the president's outside advisors over a luncheon at the Trump International Hotel. As you can see here, this proposed order directs the Secretary of Defense to seize voting machines, quote, effective immediately. But it goes even further than that.
The Secretary of Defense.
Order, President Trump would appoint a special counsel with the power to seize machines and then charge people with crimes with all resources necessary to carry out her duties. The specific plan was to name Sidney Powell as special counsel, the Trump lawyer who had spent the post-election period making outlandish claims about Venezuelan and Chinese interference in the election, among others. Here's what White House counsel Pat Cipollone had to say about Sidney Powell's qualifications to take on such expansive authority.
She had none.
I don't think Sidney Powell would say that I thought it was a good idea to appoint her special counsel. I was vehemently opposed. I didn't think she should be appointed to anything.
Sidney Powell told the president that these steps were justified because of her evidence of foreign interference.
Cipollone is not a dumb man, clearly.
Trump's allies had no such evidence and, of course, no legal authority for the federal government to seize state voting machines. Here's Mr. Cipollone again denouncing Sidney Powell's terrible idea.
There was a real question in my mind and a real concern, particularly after the Attorney General had reached a conclusion that there wasn't sufficient election fraud to change the outcome of the election. When other people kept suggesting that there was, the answer is, what is it? And at some point, you have to put up or shut up. That was my view.
Why was this
Drake, welcome.
a bad idea for the country?
This is day 7 of the January 6th committee hearings.
Machines. It's a terrible idea for the country. That's not how we do things in the United States. There's no legal authority to do that. And there is a way to contest elections, that happens all the time. But the idea that the federal government could come in and seize election machines, I don't understand why we even have to tell you why that's a bad idea for the country. It's a terrible idea.
For all of its absurdity, the December 18th meeting...
Cipollone is not a dumb man.
Got to watch up close for several hours as his White House counsel...
I would assume they've got something up their sleeve.
The baseless...
Or we wouldn't be here. But also remember, the other hearing that takes place this week is prime time. It's Thursday evening, so they might be saving something for it.
Not just from his able White House lawyers, but also from his own Department of Justice officials and indeed his own campaign officials. As White House counsel Pat Cipollone told us,
with respect to the whole election fraud issue, that to me, it's sort of, if you're going to make those kind of claims, and people were open to them early on because people were making all sorts of claims, and the real question is, show the evidence, okay?
it wasn't just the Justice Department, the Trump campaign, and the Trump White House lawyers who knew it. Even Rudy Giuliani's own legal team admitted that they did not have any real evidence of fraud sufficient to change the election result.
You think we're fools?
Here's an email from Rudy Giuliani's legal.
I'm definitely interested, but like I also like I'm a political guy, but it does seem okay. It does seem like the hearings are hitting a little bit harder than what I thought they would.
All the investigations we want.
If you watch the show, like I was skeptical of how hard these would hit. They've been better received than I thought they would be.
Say in this email was what he would later tell the Select Committee in a letter that his lawyer wrote to us in November. The letter said, quote, "It was impossible for Mr. Carrick and his team to determine conclusively whether there was widespread fraud or whether that widespread fraud would have altered the outcome of the election." In other words...
Wait a minute, are we talking about Bernie Carrick? Yeah, I bet we are, since it's Rudy Giuliani.
Before January 6th, that they hadn't collected enough actual evidence to support any of their stolen election claims.
The Justice Department is acting on things that the committee has found. So this is
about some of the so-called
surprising to me
that the campaign had seen from the Giuliani team.
So do you know what the examples of fraud, numbers, names, and supporting evidence was that you sent to Mo Brooks' office? And when I say you,
fucking Mo Brooks.
The campaign.
There are some very, very general documents as far as say, for example, here are the handful of dead people in several different states. Here are explanations on a couple of the legal challenges as far as saying that the rules were changed.
Oh, amnestic. We covered that earlier. The committee has kind of scoffed at Bannon. They're saying you're just trying to get out of your criminal trial. Your trial is going to go forward. So that's what he wanted. He wanted to come and sit in front of the committee. And they said, "Nuh-uh, you're just trying to get out of it. Go do your trial."
To learn or understand.
So the committee's kind of playing hardball with him.
Had produced evidence of election fraud. Is that fair?
That's fair.
And here's testimony that we received from the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, Rusty Bowers, about an exchange that he had with Rudy Giuliani after the election.
At some point, did one of them make a comment that they didn't have evidence, but they had a lot of theories?
That was Mr. Giuliani.
It was Mr. Giuliani.
Chief of Staff Mark Meadows told people that he
we're
thought
stupid?
Trump should
You think we're
concede
fools?
around the time the Electoral College certified the result. But nonetheless, he later worked to try to facilitate President
I
Trump's
hope it is
wishes.
not too scorching hot where you're at,
Cassidy Hutchinson
amnestic.
told us.
You enjoy a very pleasant walk.
During this period, he,
Try to keep you informed and entertained.
I perceived his goal with all of this to keep Trump in office.
Reactionary Rusties.
Seriously and deeply considered the allegations of voter fraud. But when he began acknowledging that maybe there wasn't enough voter fraud to overturn the election, I witnessed him
start
to explore potential
scorching hot and oppressive humidity
more extensively, which I then connected with John Eastman's theories.
The startling conclusion is this: even an agreed upon complete lack of evidence could not stop President Trump, Mark Meadows, and their allies from trying to overturn the results of a free and fair election.
Facts won't stop me.
Let's return to that meeting at the White House on the evening of December 18. That night, a group showed up at the White House, including Sidney Powell, retired Lieutenant General Michael Flynn, and former Overstock.com CEO Patrick Byrne. After gaining access to
all three should be in prison.
The group made their way to the Oval Office. They were able to speak with the president by himself for some time until White House officials learned of the meeting. What ensued was a heated and profane clash between this group and President Trump's White House advisors, who traded personal insults, accusations
profane
of
clash
to the president, and even challenges to physically fight. The meeting would last over 6 hours, beginning here in the Oval Office, moving around the West Wing, and many hours later, ending up in the president's private residence. The Select Committee has spoken with 6 of the participants, as well as staffers who could hear the screaming from outside the Oval Office. What took place next is best told in their own words, as you will see from this video.
Spider Biggle!
Did you believe that it was going to work, that you were going to be able to get to see the president without an appointment?
I had no idea.
In fact, you did get to see the president without an appointment.
We did.
How much time did you have alone with the president? And I say alone, you had other people with you, but
her outfit
before the crowd came running.
Probably no more than 10 or 15 minutes.
Was in that...
I bet Pat Cipollone set a new land speed record.
I got a call either from Molly or Cushman that I need to get to the Oval Office.
So one of these smart people that help keep the country running
from the White House. Mark's gone.
was Pat Cipollone.
What's going on right now?
I opened the door and I walked in. I saw General Flynn. I saw Sidney Powell sitting there. I was not happy to see the people in the Oval Office.
Explain why.
Well, again, I don't think they were providing. Well, first of all, the overstock person, I've never knew who this guy was. Actually, the first thing I did, I walked in, I looked at him, and I said, "Who are you?" I don't think any of these people were providing the president with good advice, and so I didn't understand how they had gotten in.
In the short period of time that you had with the president, did he seem receptive to the presentation that you were making?
He was very interested in hearing particularly about...
She got her Dr. Pepper.
And the terms of 13848 that apparently nobody else had bothered to inform him of.
I was asking, like, you claiming the Democrats were working with Yugoslavs, Venezuelans, and whomever else. And at one point, General Flynn took out a diagram that supposedly showed IP addresses all over the world, and who was communicating with whom via the machines, and some comment about like Nest thermostats being hooked up to the internet.
So it's been reported that during this meeting, Ms. Powell talked about Dominion voting machines.
Oh, we've got Flynn. We've got Flynn.
Claims that involve foreign countries such as Venezuela, Iran, and China. Is that accurate?
Sure.
Was the meeting tense?
Oh, yeah.
Dr. Pepper sucks, by the way. This is like the shittiest beverage. Now I'm not a pop drinker at all. I don't drink the soda. Oh, I fucked you both ways.
Hurling
Do I call it pop? Do I call it sody pop?
It wasn't just sort of people sitting around on a couch like
of all the sodas, fucking Dr. Pepper is the
fact that
worst.
she and the campaign had lost all of the 60 cases that they had brought in litigation.
Yes, he raised that.
And what was the response?
What is it? Is it a root beer? Is it a cola? It's the agnostic beverage, as South Park says.
And whoever the other guy was.
I don't like it at all. It is not appeasing to me. I like a root beer. I'm sorry, like we're getting off topic, and this shit has been juicy as fuck. I don't want to get off topic here.
Attacking me verbally. Derek, and we were pushing back, and we were asking one simple question as a general matter. Where is the evidence? So,
what response did you get when you asked Ms. Powell and her colleagues, where's the
a variety of responses based on my current recollection, including, can't believe you would say something like, things like this, like, what do you mean, where's the evidence? You should know, and things like that, or...
You should know. Do your own research.
I would say a general disregard for the importance of actually backing up what you say with facts.
And, then there was discussion of, well, we don't have it now, but we will have it or whatever.
I mean, if it had been me sitting in his chair, I would have fired all of them that night and had them escorted out of the building.
But Deborah and I both challenged what she was saying. And she says, well, the judges are corrupt. And I was like, everyone? Every
single one
in the country you guys lost, every one of them is corrupt, even the ones
Trump appointed.
And I'm being nice. I was much more harsh to her.
So one of the
he dropped a lot more F-bombs.
Was that President Trump told White House lawyers, Mr. Hirschman and Mr. Cipollone, that they weren't offering him any solutions, but Ms. Powell and others were. So why not try what Ms. Powell and others were proposing? Do you remember anything along those lines being said by President Trump?
I do. That sounds right.
I think that's the point where the screaming was completely out there. I mean, you get people walk in, it was late at night, it had been a long day, and what they were proposing, I thought was nuts.
It is nuts.
Metaphorically describe it as you guys are not tough enough. Or maybe I put it another way, you're a bunch of pussies. Excuse the expression, but I'm almost certain the word was used.
Flynn screamed at me that I was a quitter and everything, kept on standing up and turning around and screaming at me.
You think we're fools?
And then at a certain point I had it with him. So I yelled back. Either come over or sit your effing ass back down.
The president and the White House team went upstairs to the residence, but to the public part of the residence, the big parlor where you can have meetings in the conference room.
Oval? They call that the yellow oval?
Yes, exactly, the yellow Oval Office. I always called it the upper. And I'm not exactly sure where the Sydney group went. I think maybe the Roosevelt room. And I stayed in the cabinet room, which is kind of cool. I really like that. All by myself.
He really wanted to be in the cabinet.
Where we started the meeting, at least from a structural standpoint, which was Sidney Powell was fighting, Mike Flynn was fighting. They were looking for avenues.
I'd say he's drunk. I'm not high enough to look at Rudy that drunk.
In President Trump remaining President Trump for a second term.
The meeting finally ended after midnight. Here are text messages sent by Cassidy Hutchinson during and after the meeting. As you can see, Ms. Hutchinson reported that the meeting in the West Wing was unhinged. The meeting finally broke up after midnight.
It does. It sounds like trailer park shenanigans going on in the fucking White House.
The moment of Mark Meadows escorting Rudy Giuliani off the White House.
It's riveting to me.
Make sure he didn't wander back into the mansion. Certain accounts of this meeting indicate that President Trump actually granted Ms. Powell's security clearance and appointed her to a somewhat ill-defined position of special counsel.
He asked Pat Cipollone if he had the authority to name me special counsel, and he said yes. And then he asked him if he had the authority to give me whatever security clearance I needed, and Pat Cipollone said yes. And then the president said, okay, I'm naming her that, and I'm giving her security clearance. And then shortly before we left, and it totally blew up.
I can't wait to see what Cipollone has to say about this.
And or Hirschman and whoever the other young man was said, you can name her whatever you want to name her, and no one's going to pay any attention to it.
How did he respond? How did the president respond to that?
Something like, you see what I deal with this all the time.
Over the ensuing days, no further steps were taken to appoint
lawyers and the law, you stupid fuck.
What the president actually said and did during the meeting. Here is how Pat Cipollone described it.
I don't know what her understanding of whether she had been appointed, what she had been appointed to. Okay. In my view, she hadn't been appointed to anything. and ultimately wasn't appointed to anything because there had to be other steps taken. So that was my view when I left the meeting, but she may have a different view and others may have a different view, and the president may have.
Yeah, she may be delusional as fuck.
The president himself telling her she'd been appointed.
Again, I'm not going to get into what the president said in the meeting. My recollection is you're not appointed.
I mean, I'm not gonna fault anybody for staying stoned all the time. So.
And when I left the meeting, okay, I guess what I'm trying to say is I'm not going to get into what the president said or said he wanted.
Mr. Cipollone, when the matter continued to flare up over the next several days, was it your understanding that Sidney Powell was still seeking an appointment, or that she was asserting that she had been appointed by the president at the December 18 meeting?
They might. These hearings have been really fucking good. Like, anyone who has watched this would be like, this man deserves to go to jail.
Been of the view that she had been appointed and was seeking to, get that done.
And I feel like it is your, like, was
was
anybody going to be held accountable for this? If we fucking demand it, they will
As you listen to
be.
these clips, remember that Ms. Powell, the person who President Trump tried to make special counsel, was ultimately sanctioned by a federal court.
What the fuck do you think executive privilege is?
For defamation. In her own defense to that lawsuit, Sidney Powell argued
also,
that, quote,
Sir Wampus
person would conclude that the statements were truly statements of fact.
Welcome. I'm glad to see you, my friend.
And Rudy Giuliani left the White House.
I love you, buddy.
President Trump turned
away. I've been telling everybody I love him now.
Advisors' most outlandish and unworkable schemes.
DFS Donovan, what is up, my friend?
Accept the reality of his loss. Instead, Donald Trump issued a tweet.
I mean, the hearings, I thought they were going to be a waste, but they've actually hit harder than I thought they would, because they've been very effective. And if you guys have been watching, like, goddamn, this has been riveting. This is wild.
Crowd in 2020, with millions of followers on Twitter, President Trump knew exactly how to do it. At 1:42 a.m.
Yes, I think we need a French Revolution type moment. That's the way I can put it without violating Twitch terms of service.
With his explosive invitation, Trump repeated.
And I'm not high enough for this shit.
Claimed it was, quote, statistically impossible to have lost the 2020 election, before calling for a big protest in D.C. on January 6th. Be there, will be wild. Trump
By statistically impossible, what he means is there was too many trucks with Trump flags on them. There were too many people at my rallies.
Previously applied for a rally permit for January 22nd and 23rd in Washington, D.C., several days after Joe Biden was to be.
How in the fuck do you like Trump, man? That really makes me question your. Like, I always liked Trump until he got into politics. I loved it when he went on David Letterman and shit and got made fun of.
Trump
go on Howard Stern and shit, but no, it's not funny when he gets into a position of power, because he's nothing but a gigantic man. Everything that the right accuses the left of being entitled, of playing victim, of being delusional, like that all applies to Trump.
Information about numerous newly organized protest events in Washington. It included event times, places, speakers, and details.
So it just blows my mind that anyone would ever even take him seriously.
Other key Trump supporters, including far-right media personalities, began.
He deserves to spend the rest of his short little miserable life in jail, prison,
December 19th.
Just like Alex Jones should be rotting in prison.
One of the most historic events in American history has just taken place. President Trump, in the early morning hours today, tweeted that he wants the American people to march on Washington, D.C. on January 6, 2021.
And now Donald Trump is calling on his supporters to descend on Washington, D.C., January 6th.
He is now calling on we, the people, to take action and to show our numbers.
We're going to only be saved by millions of Americans moving to Washington occupying the entire area.
Right-wingers are morons. A lot of our government should be in jail. I want to crack down on a lot of things.
You can push down any kind of offense.
I would like to strictly enforce some insider trading, market manipulation, and fucking most of Congress will get swept up in that.
That's something that may actually be the big push Trump supporters need to say, this is it. It's now or never.
You better understand something, son. You better understand something. Red wave, bitch. Red wave. This is going to be a red wedding.
I don't want to say his name. Oh my God.
Trump says, show up for a protest. It's gonna be wild. And based on what
Pelosi is, I don't know if she's first on the list, but she's definitely on the fucking list, and she is definitely high the fuck up.
January 6th, kick that fucking door open, look down the street.
There are many a Democrat that need to face consequences for their actions.
Is over. The time for action is now. Where were you when history called? Where were you?
Where were you when the world stopped turning?
In that clip, you heard one of Trump's supporters predict a red wedding, which is a pop culture reference to mass slaughter. But the point is that Trump's call to Washington reverberated powerfully and pervasively online. The committee has interviewed a former Twitter employee who explained the effect that Trump had on the Twitter platform. This employee was on the team responsible for platform and content moderation policies on Twitter throughout 2020 and 2021. The employee testified that Twitter considered adopting a stricter content moderation policy after President Trump told the Proud Boys to stand back and stand by from the lectern at the September 29th presidential debate. But Twitter chose not to act. Here's the former employee, whose voice has been obscured to protect their identity, discussing Trump's stand back and stand by.
No, don't protect their identity.
My concern was that the former president, for seemingly the first time, was speaking directly to extremist organizations and giving them directives. We had not seen that sort of direct communication before. And that concerned me.
So just to clarify further, you were worried, and others at Twitter were worried, that the president might use your platform to speak directly to folks who might be incited to violence?
Yes. I believe that Twitter relished in the knowledge that they were also the favorite and most used service of the former president, and enjoyed.
Well, I believe that
sort of power within the social media ecosystem.
If President Trump were anyone else, would it have taken until January 8th, 2021 for him to be suspended?
No.
Absolutely not.
Believe me, I know. I was suspended for much fucking less.
Any other user on Twitter, he would have been permanently suspended a very long time ago.
Despite these grave concerns, Trump remained on the platform completely unchecked. Then came the December 19 tweet and everything it inspired.
Well, it's like they created a bot to get rid of Nazis on the platform, but they couldn't employ it because it couldn't distinguish between Nazis and Republican politicians.
A mob was being organized, and they were gathering together their weaponry and their logic and their reasoning behind why they were prepared to fight prior to December 19th. Again, it was vague. It was non-specific, but very clear that individuals were ready, willing, and able to take up arms. After this tweet on December 19th, again, it became clear not only were these individuals ready and willing, but the leader of their cause was asking them to join him in this cause and in fighting for this cause in DC on January 6th as well. I will also say what shocked me was the responses to these tweets, right? So these were a lot of the locked and loaded, stand back, stand by, those tweets were in response to Donald Trump saying things like this, right? So there would be a response that said, big protests in DC on January 6th, be there, be wild, and someone would respond and say, I'm locked and loaded and ready for Civil War Part 2, right? I very
Electric Boogaloo!
Trump posting this tweet on December 19th was essentially staking a flag in DC on January 6th for his supporters to come and rally.
And you were concerned about the potential for this gathering becoming violent?
Absolutely.
Indeed, many of Trump's followers took to social media to declare that they were ready to answer Trump's call. One user asked, is the 6th D-Day? Is that why Trump wants everyone there? Another asserted, Trump just told us all to come armed. Fucking A, this is happening. A third took it even further. It will be wild means we need volunteers for the firing squad. Jim Watkins, the owner of 8kun, the fringe online forum that was birthplace of the QAnon extremist movement.
Old Jim Watkins.
The importance
Q himself, probably.
Why did you first decide to go to DC for January 6th?
When the President of the United States announced that he was going to have a rally, then I bought a ticket and went.
Watkins was at the Capitol on January 6th.
I guess Q was Ron,
indicted for their
Jim. Jim was his
involvement
dad
in
or
the
half
attack
dad
on the
or whatever
Capitol
the fuck.
also responded. One of them posted on the 19th, quote, calling all patriots, be in Washington, D.C., January the 6th. This wasn't organized by any group.
Hey, DFS,
BJT
like,
has invited us,
you're asking where all the armed people were at, but like, this is day 7 of this shit. If you've been watching, you would know. You would know.
Why don't we just kill them? Every last Democrat.
You can't come in here and be like, look at these idiots.
And it's time for the day of the rope. White revolution is the only solution. Others,
if you don't know what's going on, you can't just walk in and be like, these people are idiots.
So one wrote, I'm ready to die.
You don't look very informed.
Are you ready to die, police?
Wow.
Another wrote on the Donald.win, cops don't have standing if they're laying on the ground in a pool of their own blood. The Donald.win was an openly racist and anti-Semitic forum.
I mean, that's the most based statement I've ever heard. So like,
site's founder, Jody Williams.
That's the only sentiment I share in common with those motherfuckers.
On the date of January the 6th.
I mean, people have been talking about going to D.C. as soon as the election was over.
And do you recall whether or not the conversation around those dates centered on the 6th after the president's tweet?
Oh, sure. Yeah. I mean, after it was announced that, he was going to be there on the 6th to talk. Yes. Then anything else was kind of shut out and it was just going to be on the 6th.
Okay. And that was pretty clearly reflected in the content on the site?
Yeah, sure.
On that site, many shared plans and violent threats.
You can get the shirt, the Chris Dorner shirt.
Bring handcuffs and wait near the tunnels, wrote one user. A commenter replied, suggesting zip ties instead. One post encouraged others to come with body armor, knuckles, shields, bats, pepper spray, whatever it takes. All of those were used on the 6th. The post concluded, join your local Proud Boys chapter as well. The Donald.win featured discussions of the tunnels beneath the Capitol complex.
The Donald.win.
Suggestions for targeting members of Congress, an encouragement to attend this once-in-a-lifetime event. While Trump supporters grew more aggressive online, he continued to rile up his base on Twitter. He said there was overwhelming evidence that the election was the biggest scam in our nation's history. As you can see, the president continued to boost the event, tweeting about it more than a dozen times in the lead up to January the 6th. Mr. Chairman, I reserve.
The chair requests that those in the hearing room remain seated until the Capitol Police have escorted members from the room. Pursuant to the order of the committee of today, the chair declares the committee in recess for a period of approximately 10 minutes.
I knew recess was coming.
A fight at the White House.
That's why I wanted to go refill my coffee, but I had the cotton mouth too bad.
A fight over
I had
whether
to
Donald
drink my
Trump
tea.
could use bizarre theories to justify
Drake, this hearing has actually been pretty riveting.
And then the alarming
And they're setting up. We're getting ready to hear the testimony from
on January 6th.
people that are now cooperating after participating in the riot.
This is a special report from the Washington Post. I'm Libby Casey. James Homan.
We heard about like all the crazy motherfuckers like Sidney Powell, and what we found out was Pat Cipollone.
The clash was at the White House.
Was like the smart person.
Really horrific and disturbing as we saw
that was left in the room.
Their supporters to go to Washington and attack the Capitol
at the end of the Trump administration
on January 6th.
Yeah, it would be easy to laugh at some of that testimony, Libby, if it weren't so deadly serious.
Yes. Thank you, James Hoffman.
Really did lay bare the divisions between people who were serious.
All right, I am going to go refill my coffee.
Donald Trump's efforts to
take a potty break. Also, like I've been doing this thing where, like, if I control the commercial breaks on Twitch,
right? Because we did get a clear sense
then you don't actually you don't have to sit through them later. So I'm going to take a commercial break, and I'm going to take a commercial break on Twitch.
The White House counsel who are on the payroll of the White House,
and we will be back in just a few moments.
Now we turn to YouTuber Justin FREAKIN. The guy's he's a formidable voice in the culture. Uncensored and unfiltered political talk and debate from a leftist perspective. The day's top news stories and videos with astute social commentary.
Not high enough for this shit.
All we're establishing is this guy's wicked, sick aesthetic.
Right-wingers are morons.
You brought back the wrong kind of fucking cake, you idiot.
I guess I gotta thank Matt Walsh for introducing me to Justin FREAKIN.
Yet you're like, we'll pray for somebody. You think you can telepathically communicate with a deity, and you have the audacity to say somebody else has a mental disorder. For the love of God. Hi, I'm Justin FREAKIN. I'm a leftist broadcaster and comedian, not liberal, leftist. And despite what you may have heard from right-wing propaganda, George Soros isn't handing out Soros bucks and funding people like me. There are no Koch brothers, Mercers, or any number of right-wing think tanks funding content on the left side of the spectrum the way they fund people like Ben Shapiro, Dave Rubin, and Dennis Prager. And YouTube doesn't monetize videos that are controversial or deal with politics unless you're someone like Steven Crowder. So this is an ultimatum. Become a patron. Support my Patreon, or I'm going to become a right-winger and get some of that easy money. You know for a fact that I could be bigger than Charlie Kirk or Jesse Lee Peterson.
Amazing!
All I have to do is talk about how I used to be an SJW snowflake, but the left went too far with their cultural Marxism, and Republicans are stupid enough to buy it, even though this video exists. And you know I'm right, so give me your money or I'm selling you out.